I spent 15 years discovering and deciphering Greek manuscripts. When I say so, people usually give me blank face. Greek manuscripts? What do you mean? Greek manuscripts, I say. You know, Indiana Jones, Da Vinci Code, finding hidden treasures. They look at me to make sure I'm not kidding, and usually ask, how come I ended up in this very unusual line of work? After all, the number of Greek manuscript experts in the world is like a number of people in this room. It's all actually started here in Riga with one person who lived all her life here. But let me tell you the story from the beginning. When I was at secondary school, I was a good pupil in maths and sciences, but languages were not my cup of tea. I was in a permanent conflict with my teacher of Russian. My teacher of English would sigh and say me, Natalie, let's face it, you have no linguistic abilities. And as for Latvian, when I was 16, I was chatted up by a very handsome Latvian guy at a tram stop, and I didn't have enough vocabulary to say something in return. I think that was the first wake-up call. I realized languages could be useful. So, when I entered the university, I learned a number of them. English, French, Italian. There was a different problem. It was too easy. I began to dream about a language which would be difficult to learn, which would be a challenge. Those were first years after the independence, times of many opportunities. So me and my classmates at the Faculty of Philosophy, we wrote a letter to the dean saying that we wanted to learn ancient Greek because we wanted to read Plato in the original. Came September, and we were given a teacher of Latin. Now, I never knew whether the university authorities mixed up Latin and ancient Greek, or whether they decided that ancient Greek was too difficult for us. We should start with something easier. But in any case, there were 20 or so of us waiting for our Latin teacher. And a woman came in. Immediately, she struck me with her enthusiasm, energy, and a beautiful way of speaking. I never heard anyone speaking like that before. She asked us politely why we wanted to learn Latin. After all, this is not the most useful language for philosophers. We said, no Latin, we wanted ancient Greek. Because we want to read Plato in the original. And immediately, on the spot, without any hesitation, she offered to teach us ancient Greek as well, completely for free. This was my first meeting with Inara, a woman who became my teacher of ancient Greek, the subject that I later chose for my career, and who played a very important role in my life. Very soon, we realized how lucky we were to have her as a teacher. She was not just any ordinary university professor. She was doing exciting things outside. She was teaching Latin, for example, to Latvian poets because they wanted to translate Horace. She was working with theater people who were putting on political, obscene, and very colorful plays of Aristophanes outdoors in the old town. Some of her pupils later established probably the best intellectual magazine in the region and also organized international readings of Plato in the original on the beach. They were Bible translators, researchers of local chronicles, everyone who wanted to know anything about Greek or Latin. There were, and there are, other capable and competent classicists in this country, but somehow it was Inara everyone consulted. She was like a bridge towards the ancient world. For half a century, she shaped intellectual landscape of this country. Now, you might wonder why I'm telling you all this. There are several reasons for my talk. The first, Inara died last year, and this talk is a tribute to her. But this talk is not about her death. She was already an old lady, her health was fragile, and people die. She had lived a fulfilling life. This talk is about me and about us. Personally, in the last several years, I had several occasions to realize that when someone close dies, the void which is left and the loss that you feel allow you to identify exactly the role that person played in your life. Inara was my teacher of Greek, the subject that I chose for my career. But my career developed fully in Cambridge, where I had wonderful teachers and mentors who influenced my scholarly interest and my scientific methods. There was something more to the Inara effect. Probably you know the expression butterfly effect. It comes from science. It's used in mathematics to describe interconnection between natural phenomena. When a small butterfly moves its wings in one part of the world, it can cause a huge tsunami in another part of the world. When I think about human relations and human connections, I think about the Inara effect. I remember when I was about to graduate from university, I had no idea what to do next. I had lost all interest in philosophy. In any case, middle 90s was not the time to practice philosophy in Latvia. I was at a loss. One day, out of blue, Inara asked whether I wanted a job with her department. That was the first time in my life when someone gave me something tangible, a job offer. Not as a payment, not based on past achievements, not as a trade-off, but because of some invisible future potential. To think of it. She'd known me for a couple of years, I didn't do that well at the exams, and I was a girl from Tengaraks, you know, working class neighborhood in Riga. You wouldn't call it center of high culture and sophistication. She saw something in me that I didn't see myself. And that was the Inara effect. There was another part of it. She made connections for me. A couple of years later, I was already working at the department. I decided to attend some classes in St. Petersburg, which is the regional center for ancient Greek studies. Inara wrote some letters and made some phone calls, and those letters and those phone calls opened the doors for me to the innermost of St. Petersburg philological circles. Of course, I had to work hard to earn their trust. Of course, I made many mistakes in the process, but a priori, I was accepted. The doors were open. There was another aspect of it. We argued many times, we had serious disagreements, but those disagreements would not change her attitude towards her. Even more, years later, I decided to abandon my academic career because I had reached everything I wanted and I lost all interest. She was one of the few people who didn't try to dissuade me, although she was deeply unhappy about it. To think of it, she was the person thanks to whom I got my first non-academic fulfilling job. She mentioned me to another pupil of hers, who mentioned me to someone else who was in a position to interview me. And that was the Inara effect. When Inara died, I was in Japan. It was probably the busiest time in my life. I had a job, and I was involved in half a dozen of projects that had nothing to do with my job. I was organizing a local TEDx event. I was translating a papyrus that I found in a library. I was helping with English some local associations of public speaking. I was giving talks about Latvia in a nightclub in Roppongi. And I even was answering questions about career prospects from some students. Mind you, I am not a career expert, and I have troubles figuring my own. But those guys were looking at me as some kind of international star, someone who comes from Europe, who speaks exotic languages, French, ancient Greek, Latvian. I couldn't refuse. I was fully aware that none of these projects would bring me love, money, or glory, but I was doing it, I enjoyed it, and I was thinking it was proper that I was doing it. If not me, who else would do it? And now, in retrospect, I understand that was the Inara effect. I remember when I was young researching in Cambridge, one day I needed a testimonial from a very famous British professor. And I needed it urgently, by the next day. I wrote him an email explaining the situation. We had met before, probably he didn't know who I was. I didn't know whether I would receive any answer, yet the answer came by the same afternoon with the most beautifully written paragraph of English prose. I was impressed. It was exactly what I needed. Years later, me and the same professor were working on one project. And I came into an office one day while he was finishing his emails. He apologized and said he needed a couple of minutes to answer emails from his students. Another member of the project, French guy, a rising star, looked at him in disbelief. "You are replying emails to your students?" And the British guy said in a very low-key way, "Well, it's so easy for me to do, but it might be important for them. It's so easy for me to do, but it might be important to them." Inara never expressed her life philosophy, but I think that was the principle she lived by. My journey to Cambridge started with her. She wrote me a letter of reference. I never saw it before. It was sent directly to the college. I just found it a couple of months ago when I was sorting out her papers. But this is a letter with a story. She sent the first version, and the Brits sent her a thank you note. Inara somehow thought that the first letter perhaps didn't arrive, or perhaps wasn't good enough, so she sent a second letter, and the Brits sent her a second thank you note. Upon receiving which, she thought that perhaps even the second was not good enough, and she sent a third version. I think the Brits decided they would stop this correspondence. But that was all Inara. She would go the extra mile, because she thought it wouldn't be difficult for her, but it might matter to me. Now, why I am telling you this story here now in Riga, there is one more reason. I lived half of my life abroad, but when I came back from Japan several months ago, I heard an expression that I sort of forgot about. Priekš kam? It means, why bother? Or rather, it means what for, but it implies, why bother? And I realized with surprise how often it is used as an excuse, as a pretext, by old and young alike, by people from all walks of life. Priekš kam? We are such a small country, we have no means, decisions are being taken elsewhere. Priekš kam? I cannot do anything alone. Nobody will support, nobody will understand. Priekš kam? Nobody cares. Nothing can be done, nothing will change. Priekš kam, what for, why should I bother? Now, I told you that Inara had beautiful Latvian, rich and metaphorical. She was one of the few people who used the words that I needed to look up in a dictionary. And let me reassure you, my level of Latvian improved from those days when I didn't know what to say to a flirting guy. But I never heard this expression priekš kam from her. It was just far away from everything she was. She spent her life studying ancient Greek and Latin text. Think of it, ancient Greek and Latin. Occupation far away from power, glamour, and the limelight. She was not involved in the politics. She was not running any company or organization. She was not a media person. Yet, by doing what she enjoyed, by doing what she was doing, and by doing it in her way, going the extra mile, looking beyond the visible, and doing things which would not be difficult for her, but would be important to other people, her effect, the Inara effect on me and on other people here and abroad, was profound and far-reaching.